We're going to be live here soon. All right, we are live on Facebook. I'm gonna take a minute to share this. All right, if you are seeing us on Facebook, good evening. We're just going to go ahead and share the link a few places, but if you are interested in joining the conversation, please feel free to hop on. The event information is in the link is in the event information. Right, we got a few people coming in. If you are on Facebook, again, thank you for joining us. We are going to be having a live panel, and then we are going to be going into a private session. So if you're interested in participating in the private session, then you will need to jump on the actual Zoom. Okay.
Hi, Thomas. I can't actually hear you. I can see that you're talking, but I'm not sure if anybody else.
No, I still can't hear you yet, brother. Your video looks like it's muted, but then the box with your picture is not muted. I don't know if that impacts anything.
You can probably hear me now, but there's a feedback on.
Yeah, there's an echo.
Are you logged on twice by any chance, Thomas?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. All right. Okay, so as I was saying, we're on Facebook Live. So if you don't want to be seen, then you probably want to turn your actually I'm going to ask that you turn your video off so that our panelists are the ones that are on the screen, so that we are protecting privacy. And then if you have questions, then feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or if you want to come on and state your question, then just send me a message or something, and I'll give you space. All right. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. We're here for our first, wait a minute, I'm missing my video. I'm sorry. There we go. We're here for our first How You Doing Bro? We do normally have an annual How You Doing Sis. I think we've done that 3 times. But this time we decided it's time for us to start having this conversation with Black men. So tonight is a conversation among kings on the state of mental health in the Black community. We are further planning a How You Doing Fam program, and really talking about how we're going to expand the mental health program to not only Black men, but all minority men and all men in general, because I think we should all be having this conversation. But tonight we're going to be focusing on the mental health in the Black community, because that is something that's very near and dear to my heart, as well as our panelists. That being said, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to introduce each of our panelists. I mean, I couldn't be more humbled by the talent and the wisdom that we have in this group. So without any further ado, I'm going to first introduce Dr. Milo. Did I lose my sound? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Dr. Milo Dotson is a licensed psychologist in California. As a committed advocate for service-based leadership, he directed hip-hop artist Common's Dreamers and Believers Summer Youth Camp for nearly 6 years, and currently volunteers for both Colin Kaepernick's Know Your Right Camp and Kenny Steele's Still Growing Summit. Dr. Dotson's unique pedigree as a counseling psychologist informs his empowering approach for improving companies' diversity, equity, and inclusion commitments. Dr. Dotson also co-hosts a podcast with nationally acclaimed radio personality Yessie Ortiz called Mental Health is Real, REAL, reflecting empathy and love to discuss wellness, mental health, and social justice. Another thing I'm going to throw out there about Yessie Ortiz, I grew up listening to her, interested. Like, I don't know how old she is, but I feel like I listened to her for a very long time. I'm a huge fan of hers. So welcome, Dr. Dotson. We are looking forward to hearing what you have to contribute.
I will not be contributing how old Yessie is, just for the record.
And I won't even dream of asking.
just to let y'all know. But thanks for having me.
Oh, that's awesome. Next up is D'Antoine Johnson. DJ Johnson is a counselor who specializes in working with teenagers and the parents of those teens. He uses his traumatic childhood and life in foster care to inspire not only the students to be their best, but he inspires parents to better connect with their children. He's passionate about helping parents break any generational curses that exist for them. This guy is a magnificent speaker. He runs DJ Inspires, great personality. I believe he also does a talk that works with parents and helping them cope with some of the challenges of parenthood. So I'd like to welcome Mr. DJ Johnson.
Mr. Sounds so formal. I really appreciate it. Being on.
Hey man, you know I gotta put some spec on your name.
Hey, I was gonna say, Dr. Dawson, that's self-care by not revealing the age of Miss Yessie Ortiz.
That's
self-care right there.
we can call that self-care, and we can also call that self-preservation.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, that's funny. All right. And then last but not least, we have Quincy Singleton. This guy is my hero, my brother. Quincy is a marriage and family therapist, clinical supervisor, and adjunct assistant professor of psychology at Los Angeles City College. He specializes in behavioral modification and family therapy. He has experience providing mental health services to the following populations: geriatric, adult, transitional age youth, childhood, early childhood, substance use, and severely mentally ill. Quincy got his bachelor's degree from UCR, University of California, Riverside, and his master's in clinical psychology from Pepperdine University. Quincy has nearly 10 years of experience delivering outpatient mental health services in nonprofit settings. Quincy values a holistic approach that is client-centered. He is passionate about providing access to high quality care for marginalized individuals and decreasing barriers of community access to wellness related resources. Welcome, 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 Quincy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, so how about we just jump right in? And since I introduced you guys in that order, why don't we go reverse order with your opening statements? Quincy, how about you start us off with your opening remarks, and then we'll go into some further panel questions.
So as mentioned in the brief intro, I am a therapist. I'm a practicing therapist right now. I contract with the clinic and I practice. I have my own practice where my specialty is child and adolescent therapy and also family therapy. That's mostly what I do. I do work with adults, but my passion is with youth. I'm excited to be here to talk about mental health. It's not talked about enough when it comes to men and especially Black men. I don't have very many Black men clients, and I think it's, well, we'll talk about some of the reasons why that might be, but I think it is important that we are having this conversation so that we can spread the word that mental health is important, mental health treatment works, and it can be effective.
Awesome. Thank you. How about you?
Yes, so I always like to tell people that I am a therapist stuck in the credential of a counselor. I don't operate like the traditional counselors that you see in the high schools. That's although that is what my credential says, I really do operate mostly to help students on the social emotional aspect. And my work with students has really charged me to not only continue to help them kind of power through and really get rid of this stigma of mental health, right? Like I work with a lot of Hispanic students and I see a lot of similarities between them and African Americans and what they think about mental health and how they feel about it. And so a lot of my conversations and dialogues with students is unpacking first before we can even get to the root of any of the issues that we're dealing with. And so I think these conversations like these are so important because one, I think it just brings light to something that I think a lot of our community just don't really fully understand. Because if they fully understood it, then it would make sense for them to really dive into it so we could get healthier, so that we could break these generational curses and move forward, move toward a better future. And so, as you can tell, I get really fired up about these conversations. So, but just opening, I really am excited about getting this conversation started to really, help people who are part of the actual Zoom and anybody who might be watching live. Like, I think my big thing is let's talk about this like we talk about what's for dinner. Let's talk about this like we talk about other activities and different things that we do in our lives, because it's just as important for us to be our best selves. I'm a super transparent person, which I think makes me a pretty good speaker in terms of I'm so open about my life. And I'm currently in the moment, just I've been in a year of therapy so far. And I had a therapy session last Monday, and it was probably one of my toughest sessions that I've had up until this point, to the point where I was mentally, physically exhausted. I had moments where I wanted to cry. And it all stems from this very traumatic childhood that I never had the opportunity to process, that I never had the opportunity to sit with. And so all these years, I'm all thinking that I'm in control of my anger. And the reality hit me last week that no, you just been stuffing all of your feelings and all of your emotions. And now you're to a point where you can't necessarily feel. And so all of last week, just having a conversation with myself about acknowledging my feelings and doing the different things that we've traditionally been told, don't do those things. The feelings are not good. Feelings are a female trait. And I'm learning that that is absolutely not the case. So if anything, I'm going to be open, transparent, and just for the sake of helping people ultimately see that mental health is a good thing and it's something that we really need to work on.
That was excellent. There's a lot there that we're going to unpackage. Milo, how about you?
First, let me say, good brother DJ, thank you for opening that and sharing your experiences and highlighting how essential and critical taking care of ourselves in therapy is. I think, you know, as we think about the purpose or the focus of therapy, what essentially we're talking about is there's no health without mental health. And a lot of the conversations around health tend to only focus on the physical health aspect, tend to only focus on, obviously today we're talking, or these days we're talking about a pandemic, vaccines, etc. But I also think that to be Black in America is to be that much more acutely aware of mental health and the role that it plays in our lives, but not having the tools or the awareness to be able to identify it, to explore it, and to heal ourselves. And so, you know, before I was a psychologist, I was a young Black boy in America. Even after that, I was a Black man in America without, you know, all the tools. And, you know, going through the training that you go through, the 50 million years of schooling that you have to go through to get a PhD, get licensed, etc., that doesn't mean that I myself don't have my own mental health challenges. And so I think similar to DJ, what I want to highlight is me going to therapy was one of the best things that I could have done for my clients to make me a better therapist and to heal everything so I could continue to be of support and service to my clients. And I also think that there's a gift of giving ourselves therapy. And so in closing, just as we're talking about opening remarks, I think it's essential that we continue to normalize therapy. We talk about mental health with the same, you know, validation as we talk about like barbershop conversations, talking about who's gonna take the championship in the NBA this year. And it's just a part about what it means to be Black in America. The last thing I want to say is that I think having this conversation this evening today feels particularly meaningful, and I'm grateful to have this space myself because being Black is tough at any point in this country's history, but last week just felt exceptionally tough. I don't know if we can cuss or not, but I would if we could. So it last week sucked. I'll just summarize it with that. Last week sucked. And hearing about Brother Chadwick passing on Friday just kind of was like, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of us, myself included. So I think what I'm trying to say to summarize is that I'm just grateful to have this space with everyone and to be in community for the communal healing that I think a lot of us are needing right now. So I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, you know what? We're gonna go a little off script here, but you mentioned. I'm sorry. I think there's a connectivity issue. You mentioned last week sucking, right?
Yeah.
I think it might be helpful for us to just do a check-in. Like, where are you right now? I mean, there's a lot of crap going on. I think we feel the need now to try and be strong, to try and show that we are strong, right? And so that often has us walking around wearing masks, right? So like if we can just take the masks off and peel back, right? Like, how are you doing, bro?
Oh, I can tell you, I'm not well. I mean, I think like, I had a regular work day for me today. And I think as a psychologist, as a therapist, like the days where you need to call out or you wouldn't be able to focus on the work or whatever other responsibilities you have. Ethically in the past, I've done that. Today, I wasn't at that point because I had the weekend since Friday. But like, let's say if I had to work on Saturday or Sunday, then I would have called out. So I think one of the other blessings I feel of being more aware about mental health is also being okay with not being okay. And to, when someone asks me like, how you doing, like also being okay, like, hey, I'm not good. And I think there's a lot of like, we have to determine, hey, is somebody just saying like, how you doing and like keep it pushing, or is this an actual opportunity? Does the time and the space allow for you to express yourself and to be open about things? So as Thomas, you're asking me this right now, like I'm not doing well, and these are the reasons why. I think the acuity and the severity of being aware of Black Death and Black Death being on display on a regular basis in the news, questioning. I don't know if y'all have experienced this, but questioning like, am I going to be next? Is there going to be something that just happens that makes me the target, whether or not I'm complying? It's scary, and I think that's a reality that a lot of us live with. I myself, I can also share that I have experienced and survived police brutality from when I was 15. So that's something that I know a lot of other Black folks balance and manage as well. So that's why when you hear Jacob Blake being murdered, when we think back to a couple months of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, unfortunately, the list can go on and on. That's why I say I'm not doing great. So opportunities to connect like today are part of my healing process.
I can jump in here too if I can,
Yes,
because I'm
please.
just managing. And I think what Dr. Dotson said about being okay with not being okay, that struck a chord with me because this weekend I realized that I'm just managing. And how I realized it is what I learned over my experience in mental health is I need to compartmentalize and choose when I allow myself to feel emotions in order to be there as a support for my clients. And this weekend, I just couldn't do anything at all. After I saw Jacob Blake get shot, and usually I try to stay away from watching Black people get killed on TV. It seems to be a regular thing now. But I ran into it, saw it, and it just demoralized me. I found myself being completely unproductive. I had a lot of work to do, and I slept and I just lounged around. And for me, it wasn't a good kind of lounging around. It wasn't taking care of myself lounging around. It was just like, where is the state of the world? When is this going to happen to me? Not if, it's going to happen to me. I see the cops running down the street. I don't live in a predominantly Black area, so cops target Black people in my area. So I'm still just managing, trying to figure out what to do with my thoughts and emotions if a cop pulls me over, because I'm automatically ready to be defensive because I already know what's going to happen or what I've seen happen over and over.
Yeah, and sorry about that. I'm having some technical difficulties. DJ, how about you?
I share a little bit in my opening statement. It's funny how, the events of last week happened with me having my, really tough therapy session on Monday. And then literally dealing with the ramifications of that throughout the week. And then obviously the Jacob Blake situation. And then, Chadwick Boseman passing away on Friday. I was just like, whoa, like this is crazy. Like just trying to manage everything. I'm thankfully much better than I was last week. Actually had therapy again today to really process kind of what happened to me that past week. So that really helped me. But I have the same sentiments as Quincy and as Dr. Dotson of like, you just kind of get into a sense of helplessness. And the crazy thing, I really want people to understand this because I almost feel like it's kind of being brushed over. Like you're looking and seeing four very distinguished gentlemen, people who are, doing well in their respective fields and doing well for the community and really contributing to society. And yet we have fears and all these different things that kind of come up for us where you're like, yo, y'all are dealing with that? Yes, we are. And so I just look at it and I always wonder of like, you're nobody is safe. No matter how successful you are, like nobody is safe, especially as a black man, from all the different rigors and different things that we have to kind of deal with and manage on a given basis. And so while we're having this conversation of being, dealing with our mental health and processing our mental health, the important part is just having a conversation about it. Because I think traditionally, us as black men, we don't talk about these things. We don't have conversations about not feeling okay and not doing well and being last week for me being on the verge of tears multiple times throughout the week is just like it just becomes too much. And I think for anybody, for all the different things that we have to kind of manage, it just becomes too much for us to bear. And I think overall last week I wasn't doing well, but I think I'm doing better today because I've been using the resources that are available to me to help me process, to help me manage my feelings and my emotions now. And it's a journey. I had a conversation with one of my therapist friends and we were just like I just had a moment of like a frustration like gosh, why is this so hard, why is this so challenging? And it's just like for the sake of us being the best version of ourselves, like we got to do the work. And this healing journey is a challenging journey, but I think what we'll find is the reward that comes from this once we finally get to do the work. So I'm doing okay now. I wasn't last week.
Well, quite honestly, and I'm glad to hear you guys say it because you guys are basically talking exactly the way I'm feeling, right? And so what I would like to talk about now is what is mental health? Like, what does it mean?
If I can interrupt, sorry, I know you're the moderator, but we got to know how you doing, bro. You got to check in with us.
Well, I mean, it's the same. Like, I feel this, everything that you guys said is where I am, right? Like, no matter how hard you work, no matter what it is you do, um, really, when you out in the street, you were just another black man, right? And so I don't care how educated I am. I don't care how many degrees or any of that stuff. The world has shown me that that doesn't matter, right? And we are in a place now, a defining place in this country where this country, I think, is in the middle of doing some reckoning. And so how it's going to end up and what responsibility this country takes and how we ultimately end up progressing through it is yet to be seen. And I'm trying to have faith and positivity and optimism in what that will look like. But as you guys said, it's hard. It's really hard. And so I find myself maintaining, right? What is enough to get up and get done today, get done this week, get done this moment for me to say, yes, I did that. And I did that despite how I was feeling. That's where I am. And that's why this discussion to me is just so important because I think if we're honest, then everybody's feeling a little bit like the way that we're feeling. And the only way we know that though is if we let our guard down and talk about it. That being said, like mental health, how do we define it? Like, especially as men, we know what it means to be physically strong. We know what it means to be able to do magnificent things physically. But what does mental health mean?
I think I'll just not to go in any particular order or whatever here, but just to jump in. So I often will not use any like textbook definition just because I think to be more real, it's more like digestible, more palpable. So I often think about mental health as a way of being healthy in our thoughts, in our emotions, and our actions. So how you, and I know for my co-panelists here, y'all are gonna know a little bit about my theoretical orientation, but often you think about how the way you think will then make you feel, and then how your feeling can influence and shape your actions and your behaviors. So essentially, if, as we're talking about so far, if I'm thinking like, hey, I'm in an unsafe situation, or I'm going to be the target of something, that's a thought that I'm having, the feeling that can follow is panic, fear, anxiety, depression, etc. And so I may change my actions and my behaviors based off of the way that I'm thinking and that the way that I'm feeling. So essentially, being able to have healthy mental health is to be very much aware of that and what our thoughts and our feelings are telling us. So then that way we can focus on what is within our control, and focusing on like creating safety nets, and focusing on creating different sources of support, and not just saying allies, but being able to say co-conspirators. People are going to have our back and be right next to us and be empathetic that way. So talking about mental health in those terms, I feel is a little bit more helpful than just giving like some straight up textbook definition, which is how I used to describe things or do talks and stuff. And then when I would get that like blank stare from, folks in the back row, like, I decided to go in a different direction. So
No, that actually it's helpful. Anything else that DJ or Quincy you guys want to add, either from your lens?
Yeah, I look at mental health from as an experience, and I look at it specifically as a holistic experience. I use several of the concepts from that Dr. Dodson uses also, but when I'm doing work, I factor in a person's physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being, and during this process, we also evaluate environmental influences on those factors that we look at in treatment. So for me, mental health makes up all that stuff. So for me, a typical session could be playing basketball with a client. I'm still undefeated so far in 10 years, just putting it out there if anybody want to challenge. It looks like a lot of different things because those components, we function well as humans when all of those components are clicking well together.
Yeah, like along the same lines, I won't repeat what you guys said, but I think for me, especially when it comes to dealing with students who come from backgrounds that typically don't talk about this, but they also kind of have their own stigmas towards what mental health is for them. And so for me, it's breaking down whatever kind of wall they have when it comes to the stigma, and just helping them understand that, you know, it's a conversation about how do we position ourselves to be in the best light, or be our best selves. Like, you hear me say that a lot. Like, my conversations with students is about are you operating as your best self? How do we eliminate or work through some things to help you get to that place? And a lot of times it's helping them communicate with their parents, help them communicate amongst their peers or whatever it might be, process and deal with certain situations that they're dealing with. And then by the time we finish doing all that, it's like, okay, that was counseling. That was, and they're like, oh, okay, that I didn't seem like it. But for me, it's getting away from what, you know, society might say that mental health is, and really making it plain and simple for them, so that we can get all that other crap out of the way and get down to the work of it.
That's a good point, DJ. Let's follow up on that. You mentioned stigma, right? And some of the challenges that people might have in even understanding why it's necessary, or why, they would participate because of the stigma. What are some stigmas out there that you guys know to exist pertaining to mental health, and how would you respond to them?
The big stigma that I see from parents is like, they assume that because their kid is being referred for therapy or counseling, that their kid is crazy. They have this idea that, oh, something is wrong with their kid, why they have to talk to a counselor or a therapist. And so obviously in the Black community, we have that same kind of idea of like that this therapy counseling thing you speak of is for white people. There's that stigma there. And so those are the main ones that I see in the school system, and ones that I have to combat on a consistent basis. I'm sure Quincy and Dr. Dotson can speak to others for sure.
Yeah, one of the stigmas that I see is in our community, we have this unwritten rule of you keep secrets, and therapy is a place where secrets come out. So you can't go to therapy because you have to keep those secrets. And if you do go to therapy, you get the side eye if you start going into a secret. And then after therapy is over, then you get an earful if you're part of the family because you didn't keep that secret. So, and I think this kind of stigma that pairs along with this is just the idea that therapy is going to destroy the family or is going to disrupt the family unit or the way the family functions. But it couldn't be further from the truth. Family therapy, especially, the goal is to help communication, is to help people get to know each other better. So it's actually the opposite. Once those secrets are out and you have a chance to work through it, this helps people, helps families get along better with each other.
Yeah, I love what you said there, Quincy, because I think a lot of times when people get so used to dysfunction that they think that it's normal. And then when you start healing yourself, then it's like, well, wait a second, you're messing up the flow here. So that's a part of that I wanted to highlight. In terms of stigma, something else, approaching this from a different angle here for a second. A lot of times, in addition to thinking that therapy, mental health is only something for white folks, so there's a racialized part of it. Two, there's a very gendered part of it because it's not just like white folks, but it's white women in particular. So there's the masculinity aspect to consider. And then three, there's the historical mistrust of the healthcare system overall. And it's not just specific to mental health, but like I said, the healthcare system, period. When we think about Black folks being experimented on in the Tuskegee experiment, that was like what, 40 something years ago. So, or 50 years ago. So it's not like we're that far removed from being the lab rats and just being viewed as part of an experiment. So I get why people have a mistrust and have a stigma. The other part of it, and the last piece I'll close with on this side, is that there's, in addition to feeling like we got to keep the secret, it's like, oh, well, you need to just pray about it. And you need to like go to the prayer closet, whether folks are from a particular religious background or whatever, you just got to pray on it, baby. Once you pray on it, give it up to Jesus, you're going to be all right. And so what I always encourage folks to think about is you can have a therapist and you can have Jesus, or, whoever the deity, the religious base is there. So knowing that there's an aspect of therapy that fits in well with someone's spiritual and religious background is necessary. And again, we as therapists need to be culturally competent to be aware of all of that background, all of that context, so we know how to talk to folks about either starting therapy and or continuing therapy. So stigma actually tends to be one of the biggest barriers for folks to start it. And so I'm glad that we're talking about that.
If I could just piggyback on what Dr. Dotson said real quick,
Sure.
because I think the stigma that he noted is valid in my experience as far as not trusting the healthcare system. So even when I access it currently today as a provider, I am cautious. This should not prevent a person from seeking services, but I always, when I talk to my people about what services look like, I always encourage them to ask good questions and to look for providers that have similar belief systems as they do. I've seen many of my colleagues make child abuse reports in situations where there's no way a child abuse report wasn't warranted just because they didn't understand cultural factors that were present. So it is important. This is why it is important to have Black providers. It is important to have the minorities as our providers, because I get to see it firsthand when I talk in supervision with a room full of therapists, how a white therapist may misinterpret something that happens with the Black family. And then now it's up to me or somebody else to try to point this out and say, hey, I don't think what you saw was what you think you saw. So I appreciate Dr. Dotson for pointing that out.
That's a big point. One of the stigmas that I hear a lot, and quite honestly, I was guilty of myself, is thinking that the default is normal. And the default is, I don't need a therapist, or I don't need help to be mentally healthy. And if I do need help, then there's something wrong with me, right? And so because there's something wrong with me, or because I don't want there to be something wrong with me, or because I don't believe there's something wrong with me, I don't want to step into either accepting something is wrong with me, or maybe even finding out and discovering that something is wrong with me through that lens. And it's just a simple fact that whenever we think that a person is getting mental health help or support, we automatically get to the point of thinking they're insane, or they've lost their cognitive function, or their ability to decide what is right and wrong in the world, right? And so that is something where I had to overcome that. And quite honestly, I have my brother here. He's my mental health hero, where he was able to tell me, well, you don't need this, you don't need this, we can do this, and this can work for you. And so that kind of takes me into my next question. What does mental health help look like, or support looks like? What if I'm normal, right? We're normal, but everybody is experiencing something crazy up here right now, right? I need help. I want support. What does that look like?
Well, I think the first step, Thomas, that you're talking about, you describe it like everyone's crazy up here right now. I think everyone is completely sane up here. It's everything out here that's completely bonkers. And so you're asking, like, how do we manage mental health? How do we help the healing? Is to actually differentiate by saying, like, hey, look, you're having a normal reaction to abnormal circumstances. Black folks who experience race-related stress and trauma are having normal reactions to a white supremacist system and different factors there. Folks who are returning from war are having traumatic experiences because war is not a regular human occurrence. And so I think the first step is to actually normalize and validate what folks are going through, and to separate the internal from the external. Because Thomas, what you mentioned in your previous comment about your own personal experience, it's almost like we set it up to say with our expectations that to feel is to fail. And we really have to recognize that we can't expect to not feel. So if we normalize and we set the expectation from the beginning that it's okay to react the way that we're reacting, that's the first step in our healing process. Because otherwise, again, as soon as we have a feeling that we don't like, we feel like we failed. And that's not the case at all.
That's excellent reframing. Thank you.
Hey, man, I got, a little bit of practice, so it's all good. Happy to help you out, bro.
He said, they don't call me doctor for nothing.
I'm gonna slide you the invoice later, my man.
Hey. Man, so good. Man, I think for me, there's got to be a level of awareness for us, or whoever is trying to seek the service, right? Like, am I operating on all cylinders in my relationships? Am I managing my day-to-day stress? Like, we all kind of have this idea, maybe society kind of does it to us, that stress is a bad thing, but stress is necessary. We just have to do a better job of managing it. So that's when coping skills come into play. That's when, you know, doing different things that help you relieve the stress that we deal with on a daily basis. And especially for Black men, that stress level is elevated, heightened. And so I think there's a level of awareness that comes with that, of just acknowledging where you are and what is needed. Do you need to go beyond whatever it is that you're already doing? Do you got to process? And the idea about therapy is like, it's something that's completely up to you. It's a customizable thing. Like, if you only need 6 weeks of it, then only do 6 weeks of it. If you need more than that, then you do more. It's totally like, nobody's forcing you to do anything. At least that's how I operate as a counselor, and I'm sure you guys do the same. But I think you're being aware of it. And then one thing I really want to say is, what I run into with a lot of my students is that they have one experience with a therapist or a counselor, and they frame their entire ideas of therapy and counseling off that one bad experience that they had. And so my advice is, shop around like you shop around for cars, like you shop around for your clothes, for the flyest shoes. Like, you got to have that same tenacity when it comes to your therapist. Like, I just did a video recently about, you know, finding the right therapist for you. And one of the things that I mentioned was, it's okay to, if you don't like a therapist, move on to the next one. If you don't get good vibes with a therapist, try to find another one that you get good vibes with. I was lucky and got good vibes on my first try, thankfully. But my wife had 2 tries before she got a therapist that she really liked. So I think people just want to kind of get you guys hip to the process. It's okay to, you know, find a therapist, dibble and dabble and kind of use a buffet line, however you want to say it. Like, figuring out who is going to connect with me, who is going to understand where I am, who is truly going to help me return to some sense of normalcy where I can handle and manage the different stressors of my day. And so be aware. And then also, don't be afraid to shop around for a therapist or a counselor, because one bad therapist does not, you know, speak for all of us therapists and counselors. There are some really good ones out there, and sometimes you got to put in the work to find the one that's right for you.
So when I think about mental health support, this is where I practice my holistic approach. I do see it as participating in therapy, but I don't consider it as being limited to therapy. So I look at, if a person is not ready to come to therapy, I get this frequently where a person just doesn't feel ready. To me, that's okay. That doesn't mean go back home and do the same thing. That means, what else can we try? Can we try a life coach? Can we try to go to church if you are religious? Or can we try to beef up spiritual practices, meditation, yoga? Do we need some acupuncture, some massage? Do we, what do we do to address mental health? It doesn't have to be therapy. It could be going to the gym more often and playing basketball with the homies. So I think it's important for people to realize that you will be ready for therapy when you're ready, and when you're not, there are other options. It doesn't mean go back home and continue to suffer. You can get ready for the process if you don't feel like you're already ready.
This is
To
fantastic.
interject really quick, can you guys hear me? Hi, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself and I showed up kind of late. But when we're talking about addressing issues in I believe we're talking about the Black community. I think it's important to note some of the underlying causes and address those, because I kind of thought Quincy was going there. If we have issues with housing, if we're sick,
Wait, hold
we're
on,
not,
hold on.
if we're physically.
I don't want to go there yet. That's my
Okay.
next question.
All right, cool. All right, I'll wait. My bad. Sorry.
No. That's good. I love that you're thinking, because that's exactly where I was going, because you know, Milo talked about needing to normalize, you know, not necessarily thinking that the problem is internal, but external. It's okay to feel, and feeling is not failing, right? And DJ talked about the awareness, right? Being aware, shopping around therapists, you know, getting exposed to different therapy, coping mechanism. And then Quincy, you gave a list of different ways that we can engage mental health support. My question, and this is kind of going to go to the question that my brother was getting at. But I guess it's a two-part question. First, how do I know when I'm not okay, right? How do I know when things around me are not okay and I need this support and I need to shift, right? And so the reason why I want to link this to what my brother brought up is we have a history, we have unique experiences. What are some type of situations? What are some things that we've been exposed to that might put us in this position of needing something, right? Needing that support. And then when we get there, how do we know that we are there? How do we know that we need to do more? Does that make sense?
Nobody want to jump in.
You go ahead first.
I'll just, like I said, I'm super transparent, so I'm gonna just kind of tell what kind of happened for me because I'm only a year into my therapy journey. And so, a year ago, I'm a business owner, so I run DJ Inspires. It's like a consulting business. I contract with schools to provide counseling and services for parents and different things like that. I do speaking as well. I also didn't mention this, but I also work full time. So I kind of have a double life. I'm a sports guy and I'm also a counselor. So I still work full time at Fox for the show Speak for Yourself with Marcellus Wiley and Emmanuel Acho. I work behind the scenes as a researcher. So I have that. I'm married. We're 6 years celebrating on the 5th of Saturday. I have a son who's now 3. And you're probably wondering, why am I going through my whole thing right now? Well, all those things going on, and there was still something not hitting on all cylinders for me. And one of the things that I first started to notice was my relationship with my wife. How am I operating with her? Are we loving at the level that maybe we loved at the honeymoon stage? And as you learn when you're married, that honeymoon stage wears off and then you get to the real work of your marriage. So there was that for me. Then the most important thing that happened for me that I noticed was how I respond to my son. I mentioned my traumatic childhood. There's a study called the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And what they do is there's like 10 different abuses that happen in this study. And for every one that happens to you, you assess yourself a point. And so I had, by the time I was in the elementary school or middle school, I had every single one of the things on this ACE score, there's 10 of them, happen to me. So I have an ACE score of 10. And so, and the stats behind that is even crazy. If you have a 6 or higher on your ACE score, your lifespan is shortened by, I believe, 20 to 30 years. And so the implications of a traumatic childhood, such as the childhood that I had, are life-threatening. So all those years of going through that trauma and then kind of masking it and hiding it and suppressing it, all these years kind of came to a head. It came to a head in my relationship with my wife. It came to a head in my relationship with my son, who I say it all the time. Like, I go back, I fight myself because of the childhood and the way that I was raised and the parents that I had. I'm fighting myself as I raise my son. Sometimes I've had to catch myself when I yell at him for something that I used to get yelled at for when I was a kid. And I have to kind of combat those things. So all these things were kind of coming up for it. No matter how successful I am in life, like I still was dealing and having these different things in my closet and wasn't what I felt like was operating at my best self. And for me, I was a kind of a red flag of like, okay, I really need to have a conversation, with someone about this, especially me being a counselor, working with students, working with parents. Eventually, it was going to come to head of like, I think you need what you're giving to your students. And that's what ultimately happened for me. So for me, it was how I was in my relationships, wife with my son, and then the other relationships that I might have. My family, my familial relationships are not great. Right? I'm still working through those different things. My mom wasn't in my life for a good portion of my childhood. So there's that relationship that I still kind of struggle with a little bit. My stepdad was very abusive and was the cause of a lot of the ACE score trauma that I had. And so that relationship was very impactful to my mental health. Excuse me. And so for me, it was really kind of hitting the head in my different relationships and figuring out like I'm not my best, even though I'm succeeding and I'm doing all these amazing things in life. Like I'm just not who I can be. I'm not the best version of myself. And for me, going to therapy was the way to be able to get to that space. So a year into it, I'm very happy and thankful that I pursued that journey, because now I'm freed up to really truly be my best self, so that ultimately I could be my best self for the people that I serve.
So I see therapy very similar to DJ. I am gonna reframe the question, and how I start conversations with clients is, um, I've rarely met people who need therapy. However, therapy is beneficial for most people. I haven't met a person who cannot benefit from therapy. And I've worked with severely mentally ill people. Those are the people who need supports, they need services in order to function at any given level in society. So when we look at the benefits of therapy, then I try to break it down a little bit more and say, are we looking at improving the evolution of a person's consciousness, or is there a problem to solve? Or are we doing a little bit of both? So if there's a problem to solve, in our field, we look at what's called a functional impairment. Do I have symptoms that influence my behaviors in a negative way so much that it starts to interfere with life at work, life at home, life at school, in the community? We look at several factors to see where the problems are. And an extension of that is looking at trauma. So if I had to narrow it down to one thing, how do I know if therapy could be beneficial for me? Have you had a trauma? If you say yes, then most likely therapy could be beneficial for you, even if it's somebody picking your brain, walking you through those emotions.
Quincy, and this is, I think, kind of what Craig was getting at. Can you define what is a trauma? What is trauma?
So trauma is an adverse experience that that a person will have where they either fear severe harm or fear death to themselves or somebody in their immediate vicinity. And we know it's a trauma when this incident has an impact on their functioning. For example, they have nightmares. Kids will wet the bed more often. Kids will do play. So, like, for example, if you're in the hood, you see a drive-by, and you're a kid, you might reenact these drive-bys because this is just the brain trying to make sense of what happened. Adults will become hyper vigilant. So sometimes people are assaulted, so you might kind of be like, what happened? So people just tap you on the shoulder and you just have this exaggerated response, we call it. So it's these experiences, these kind of major experiences that we have that shape the way we look at things. It could even be getting hit with the belt, which a lot of us have been. So that's a trauma, and we don't look at it in our community as a trauma, but that is a trauma.
And I mean, what about being belittled at work, or like what are some other ways that we might be traumatized that we are not? I mean, it's easy. I think the physical abuse part, I think it's easy to pinpoint as traumatic, right? But what are some other experiences? And I know we're off script here, but what are some other experiences that we might be feeling that are traumatic, but we are not taking full account of them as trauma?
I think there's a lot
I'll just tap in super quick here, and then I'll let my brothers help me out on this one. I think one of the barriers that we might run into is cultural. In our book, how we're supposed to describe trauma is something actually has to happen for a trauma. So some major event. They don't necessarily look at, like, let's use a work example. Somebody say something to you at work as a potential trauma if you don't think your life or somebody's life is in danger. So that's my understanding, and I think it is valuable to look at how we look at what a trauma, how we define what a trauma is, and the impact.
I think kind of echoing whoever mentioned like the spanking with the belt. There's like a lot of issues in in African American families, just based off of intergenerational trauma, which is another form of trauma that you experience, and sometimes you don't even know that you're actually affected by it because it's been passed down throughout generations in your family. And I think until we can address some of the intergenerational trauma within our own families, that it's going to be hard to actually come out and say things like, oh, I need counseling, I should go see a counselor. That's or oh, I need to go see a psychiatrist. I think in most, I can't speak for everybody, but I echo a lot of you guys' sentiments in terms of negative connotations around seeing a therapist or a psychiatrist or a counselor in the Black families. That's just something that it just doesn't happen, and it's not going to happen because we don't have access. We barely have access to care. So when will we get access to? I mean, it can happen. Sorry, not meaning it's not going to happen, but until we break those cycles, it won't happen. So
Yeah,
that's
and I
it
think,
for me.
and addressing what Craig's saying about the intergenerational trauma, to connect what Craig's talking about and Thomas is talking about, there's different ways that intergenerational trauma is going to present itself, and it's not always going to be in a physical sense. So oftentimes we think about abuse only occurring in a physical sense. And similarly, trauma could be about how you're traumatized from being manipulated year after year after year, whether that's from a parent to a child or, sibling to sibling. So there's lots of different ways that people can experience trauma. It's also, or I should say, there's different types of trauma, and there's different way that people can experience it. So sometimes we can be hyper vigilant. Sometimes we can be that much more easily excitable. And even whether that's being like over sexualized sometimes in our relationships, but there's also sometimes folks who almost like go within on themselves, and so we become that much more reserved. We become that much more subdued, or sometimes we don't want to have any more social interactions. And so I think we can say there's one or a couple of different types of trauma, but I also think that it's important to point out people are going to respond to quote unquote same type of trauma in very different ways. All are valid, all happen in different ways at different times. So it's a matter of, like, again, validating and normalizing trauma that way.
How does we talked about some of the stigma. I want to talk a little bit, and this intergenerational thing I think is huge. And it also represents a challenge, right? What are some challenges that we know exist out there for people accessing mental health, and how can people mental health support, and how can people overcome some of those challenges? I know there's the cost thought or stigma or challenge, there's the availability. We talked about representation, right? Part of the reason why it took me so long to see a therapist is I really refused to talk to anybody who didn't look like me, right? I tried it, but then I went in and my first therapist was a white woman. And there was absolutely no way I was in a position of opening up to her, right? So what are some of those challenges that prevent people from accessing therapy, and how can we overcome them?
So the biggest travesty that I see, and I just want to talk about this because I just think it impacts so many of us, is mislabeling. So I see a Black person come in and they have irritability or anger and they lash out. And what happens? They either can't get help because people are afraid of them, or they say they're afraid, or they label them bipolar, or they go way out of the box with something that doesn't even apply, when all we have to do is look at the research and say, if you're a man and you have irritability, that's an indicator of depression. So let's not look at bipolar first, because you actually have to have a set of symptoms to be bipolar. You have to have a manic episode, and they categorize the aggression as a manic episode. when in reality, depression just looks different for men than it does for women. So that's the biggest travesty that I've seen repeatedly over time since I've entered the field.
And you think about somebody who's suffering from just depression, and then you end up getting diagnosis bipolar, you're on medicine and all that stuff. Then you start down a rabbit hole, right? And that ends up being one of those stigmas that we talk about that will prevent somebody from accessing the help if they don't get the right type of help.
Exactly. I've seen kids 8 years old taking antipsychotic medication, mood stabilizer medication. These are medication they give to people with bipolar disorder. Kids this young, 8, 10, 12, starting them on these medications early, when the reality is, back to trauma, they have trauma that they haven't addressed, and it manifests as a behavioral outburst. And these kids have a limited opportunity because the medication is dulling their experience. So when it comes to doing the work to help them relieve themselves of the emotions, or to process or deal with the emotions, it's hard because the medication makes it hard for them to feel. So that was a good point.
I love to point folks back to the old cliche we often think about: your skin folk is not your kinfolk, and your kinfolk is not your skin folk. So what I mean by that is, one of the barriers for identifying a culturally competent and culturally congruent therapist is being able, I think DJ had pointed out earlier, being able to like shop around for a therapist, empowering folks to think about asking these types of questions like, hey, if I'm looking for a therapist, for example, like, hey, as a Black man, how might you work or how might you approach the concerns I have with race-related stress, to be able to kind of see how they may respond and what that therapy experience may be like. Because a lot of times we may see early dropout in treatment because people don't feel affirmed or people don't feel seen in all of their identities. So again, automatically not assuming that just because somebody has the same racial identity as you, that they're going to have the same experience, or they're going to approach supporting you and your race related stress in the same way. I think, and again, we get a sense of how they may like offer that support by asking that question early on. And similarly, like I'll speak from my own professional experience here, just within the field. Some of the most affirming people and the people who like I feel seen by don't identify as Black. And some of my coworkers who I know consistently show up to me are white women. And so I think it's not just automatically, all right, boom, let me say this person is Black, I'm going to have X, Y, and Z of a therapy experience. I think it's helpful to know what your preferences are, but to also like feel empowered to make that decision for yourself. And also working with your insurance company, also working with the sliding scale to identify different therapists. There's an amazing website that I use to give referrals to at times. It's called psychologytoday.com. You can search by insurance provider. You can search by city or county. Most therapy these days is virtual anyway. So as long as they're like within the same state, then it's all good. But again, psychologytoday.com will, one, show you if by insurance, two, if by a sliding scale, and that can connect you to a therapist based off of your income level. And then three, you can actually see a picture of the therapist and read a little bit of their bio to help you in that decision-making process.
DJ, you had anything you want to add to this?
I mean, you guys said it already. It's just for the sake of not like repeating. I think in respects to schools, since I do a lot of my work in the schools, what I've learned is that schools have an obligation to do parenting related activities and different things to help parents with their students, whether it be workshops or whatever it might be. I also learned that they have an obligation to provide resources for students when it comes to mental health. And so you'll see a lot of schools, at least in the district that I work in, will hire out, therapists. Um, this particular district has hired me on to work with students in particular. So if you're a parent who is seeking or needing that resource, you can potentially get free resources at your school by having a conversation with the counselor and saying, hey, what is available for my son or daughter or whomever to be able to get some help or some assistance with their studies or processing a loved one falling or passing away, I should say. Um, I would kind of reach out to that counselor or principal, assistant principal. Usually, the assistant principal of achievement is the principal that I work with a lot, and they would have information about how they could get your child the help that they need in the school system.
So I put the link that Dr. Dotson was talking about psychology today in the chat. I also put a link to Open Path Collective, and this is a website where you can find the therapists that they all operate on a sliding scale. So therapy can be costly, as it was already mentioned. But this website, Open Path Collective, all the therapists work on a sliding scale where they all accept a significantly reduced fee for therapy. So this is a good alternative for people who don't have insurance or they don't qualify, they don't meet medical necessity with their insurance.
And I actually put those links in the on our live thread on the Social Justice Advocacy Project page. So yeah, folks on Facebook have access to those links as well. Thank you for that. So we have about 15 minutes. What I would really like to do is kind of use this time to connect with the heart of the issue, right? So if our attendees, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and express those. Something that you want our panelists to dive into or clear up, please do that. But what I'm going to invite our panelists to do as well is, you have the entire Black community's attention, right? Let's talk about Black men. You have every Black male's attention right now, right? What is the lesson that you want to drive home most? What is most important that you would want them to walk away with from this discussion? And you could take a minute to think about it. And in fact, actually, while you guys think about that, I will share my own personal experience that I'm, currently participating in as far as getting my own mental health support. But I came to a point, actually it was about 2 years ago, I lost my cousin, and it was a real big impact on my life. Not only did I lose my cousin, but I was also in the middle of a jury trial. My client was facing life in prison. And I had about 6 men that were clients. I'm an attorney. And they were all facing really, really, really bad things. And it all happened literally because they snapped, right? I had, a father who was a fantastic father, who was in the military, had a great history. All of a sudden, one day, boom, something happens. Now he is fighting for his family back, in DCFS, dependency court. I represented several people in criminal cases, and all of them were just, these snap judgments where, they went too far, or maybe they had a little bit to drink and that tapped into something that they weren't prepared to release. And so it ended up leading to, in some cases, catastrophic life mistakes. I have clients that are in prison right now, and they probably will be in prison for a very long time because of some of the mistakes that arose because of this. I just want to get people to understand that mental health is so important that it's one of those things that if you don't take account of it, it ends up taking over your life. And once it does that and you lose control, then it's a lot harder to bring that back, right? Than it is for you to try and regulate it in the first place before something bad happens. So, you know, all of that stress and all that stuff made me feel like I needed help. And I've been getting help, and even just kind of the talking, you know, what we've been unpackaging and what I've been able to unpackage, and the realization I've come to is I do a lot of stuff and I have no idea why, right? And it has a lot to do with what I'm learning with, you know, how I was raised and things I experienced early on. So my one thing to people is, I don't care where you are, I don't care how successful society tells you you are, you know, everybody needs this. And this actually goes to what both Quincy and Milo said. Very rarely is a person going to be at the point of absolutely needing it, but most people have something beautiful to benefit from it. And I think if we start to reframe the discussion to Milo's point, that we are acting appropriately in inappropriate circumstances, right? We are acting, we are not failing by feeling the stress of our environment. That to me matters so much, because as a man, I feel like we have this obligation, or we feel this obligation to wear everything around us and to protect everybody around us. And that means to us putting on this facade of strength, of stubbornness, of anger, right? And so really what we're hiding is fear. And that's okay. It's okay to feel that fear, right? Just embrace it, surrender, and, you know, get the support you need. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. I have the thing that I'd like for people to take back. It's a piggyback is mental health support is just a conversation. For me, it's just a conversation with people. Anybody who comes to me, we start with a conversation, and I'd like to encourage people, when you start that conversation, it's okay to be open. So you can tell the therapist that style really doesn't work with me. My response to that is, tell me what style works. If I got it in my tool belt, I'm gonna switch it up. If I don't, I'll help you find somebody. So don't be afraid to say either that doesn't work, or can you help me find somebody else? And most therapists will help you find somebody else that they think might fit more of what you need. So that my takeaway is, to encourage people just to start the conversation. I ask people, just consult with a therapist. Most therapists will consult with you free for 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes I get into hour-long consults that I don't charge people, because I get wrapped up in it, and I'm like, okay, this is where I start pointing things out, and then you make a decision based on what you hear.
Amazing.
What I want to leave folks with is, and I think we've all touched on this in different ways, when it comes to mental health, particularly discussions in the Black community and amongst Black men, I think it's necessary and required of us to redefine what it means to be strong, and what it means, as this helicopter goes by, what it means to be strong and what it means to have strength. The four of us have talked about our own personal experiences in therapy, the challenges we've experienced, some of the trauma that we've experienced. And hopefully folks have been able to tell that, again, what we talked about earlier, one, it's okay to not be okay. But two, that how difficult life is at times, even for esteemed, accomplished people. So I think one thing I want to say is that if it's hard and you're experiencing difficulty, to be able to go to seek therapy out, that shows strength, because you're already saying, hey, it's hard to feel these things. It's hard to feel and experience these things. So instead of the easier way out to ignore that, to be able to be strong and redefine the strength to be able to seek therapy out. Because the thing about pain is that it's kind of like that, that one person on social media where it's like, oh, I got time today. And sometimes pain is going to be like, I actually don't have time. I'm gonna come back to you. But other times it's going to be like, I have time today. So we can either confront the pain and be strong in that approach because it is difficult, or we can wait until it confronts us. And that don't look pretty for nobody. So again, redefining what it means to approach pain and to feel and to work through these challenges is what I want to really want to leave people with.
Beautiful.
So good. You guys have set the bar really high. I think for me, for me, I really want those of us out there. I feel like our generation, at the probably when we're old and people are trying to figure out what mark did we set on this world, it's probably going to be the ones who broke the generational curses. And what I will say is breaking a generational curse is so hard. It's hard on you spiritually, it's hard on you physically, it's hard on you mentally, because what we mentioned already before, your family, because this is such a new thing for them, they're gonna feel like you're too good, or they're gonna feel like you're doing these things to kind of upset the order of the family. And Quincy said it earlier about you know, keeping secrets and how that's gonna destroy the family, and he disagreed with that. I was like, yo, we are destroying the family. We're destroying the old ways of thinking and being when we tap into these new ways of dealing with our generational curses and all these different things. So for me, the message is don't be afraid to be the first. Don't be afraid to be the first that's gonna say, I'm not gonna whip my kids. I'm not gonna inflict pain or abuse on them. I want to raise them in a way that's going to affirm them, raise them in a way that's going to help them and train them up in the way that we want them to go. You know, we find ourselves, the older generation, always quoting the Bible, especially when it comes to validating the fact that they whip their kids, when they say,
Bear the rod,
spoil the
spoil the
rod,
child.
spoil the child, and yet spare the rod, spoil the child. Like we like to nitpick and find the things out of the Bible that fits our argument, but we rarely fit find other parts in the Bible that would pretty much conflict against all the different things that we do as parents at times. And so I think for us, for those who are going to be the generational curse breakers, this is going to be a journey that's going to be challenging and hard and difficult. But I promise you, at the end of the day, that it is going to be well worth it. And yes, you are gonna be battle tested. I promise you. I have been myself. I think it helps to get people around you who have also kind of been in this battle. Get people around you who are going to be okay with the person that you are becoming, right? Like a lot of times we get people around us that are not even okay with us being better, with us wanting better. And so I think as we tap into this new new world, new generation of breaking generational curses, I think we just have to be okay and be strong enough and weather the storm of that, and know that you are doing something really well, that the generations behind you are really gonna benefit. Think about this. I always used to wonder, you know, people will say, in the black community, we will say something about what a white person does when it comes to their kid. It's like, oh, that's so white. Like that's what little Timmy, that's what they do with little Timmy. And it's like, think about little Timmy. Timmy ultimately ends up becoming a CEO of a company. And a lot of that might be because he was handed to him, but he also was instilled the confidence enough to be able to become a CEO, whether he got there or
Exactly.
not. And so when it comes to our black kiddos, we are not affirming our kids. We are not giving them that type of confidence where they feel like they could become a CEO, because we don't need anybody to really give us something. Although it would be nice, we will bust our butts off to be able to get it. I never saw myself being a CEO of my own company when I was even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. But I think once I was able to kind of work through and process different things and get to meet different people who are doing it and doing all these different things, like it exposed me to better, it exposed me to more. And I think, and so one thing I'm working with my son is like, if I had been affirmed, if I had been allowed to be a kid, right? Like when you think about black communities, like we get in trouble a lot of times for doing stuff that kids do. Like
Exactly.
what? You're gonna yell at me because I want to play around and I don't want to stand and sit in a line for an hour or be at the grocery store because you shopping or running your errands with you? Like, no, I'm a kid. And so I think for me, it's just tapping into what is really normal. Not normal because we thought white people only do it. No, normal in general. What's normal for a healthy kid to be the best version of themselves, whether they're black, whether they're white, it doesn't matter. I want a healthy kid. I want a kid who's going to be a business owner someday, or want to be a president someday, or want to be whatever he wants to be. But I also have to kind of instill that into him and affirm him. And I think that's not happening enough in our black homes, black families. I just went all over the place, but break those generational curses. There we go.
That was amazing, and quite honestly, I'm gonna end it right there. What I do want to do, we have just a few minutes left. I'm gonna end the live stream so I can talk to our attendees. I want to check in on them, see how they're doing. But that those reflections are exactly where we're gonna leave it, because I think that's wisdom. I've been incredibly humbled by the wisdom and the contributions of this panel. Quite honestly, my spirit is made better from this discussion. This is not going to be our last discussion. I'm hoping to have these gentlemen back to expand the conversation, to continue the conversation, because my soul is blessed. And so thank you guys for your vulnerability. Thank you guys for opening up and your honesty. If you're on Facebook, look out for more events that are going to be coming, because this is going to be something that we are looking to tackle on a comprehensive level. So like I said, this is the start of many conversations. In fact, this isn't even the start. The conversation started with our How You Doing Sis that's run by my wife and her committee. So thank you guys on Facebook. You guys have a good evening.